So our next speaker is from Norway, and he's an advisor, a policy advisor to the Norwegian Wind Energy Association. And Norwegian companies have been pioneers. Equinor have been pioneers in Scotland, now in Norway, with not just fixed bottom parks, but also, and very important for Greece, floating. So Daniel, welcome to our webinar. Enlighten us. How can we be a little bit like Norway? Yeah. Offshore wind.
Speaking of pioneers, I was reminded when Mr. Zavro spoke. I have a presentation there as well, if you could put that up. I was reminded when Mr. Zavro spoke of electrolysis that the Norwegian hydropower was built from 1903 to service the production of hydrogen. And since then, of course, we've moved over to gas, but we are also moving back to renewable energy resources for our hydrogen production, which is something that ties in, of course, to our offshore wind. Well, as a Norwegian and then, of course, a foreign lobbyist, I will try to be very careful with making direct recommendations for Greece specifically. But on the tail end of this session, I'll try to bring in some more general points as coming from a country which also is lagging behind in its development, but which is quickly gearing up and designing its legislatory process to facilitate offshore wind development. Now, the promise of offshore wind for Greece and for Norway, I believe, look a bit similar. And I used this picture earlier in one of these workshops to illustrate how offshore wind has always been sort of out of the grasp of Norwegian authorities, and we have been unable to accelerate the development of offshore wind, and mostly due to our low power prices. Now, this picture may also serve, I think, to illustrate the promise that offshore wind brings to coastal nations such as Greece and Norway. And I think that the motivations and the similarities in motivations for Greece and Norway to build offshore wind should be many, and let me touch a bit on that. So the maritime commercial sectors of Norway and Greece should see a lot of opportunities in solutions for each other's markets and also for the European market. But that means that both in Greece and in Norway, we have to be careful to design our rules and regulations such that they fit with the expectations of the European and international community, the developers and the financiers. And we are also very glad, I have to note, to see Equinor and Arne Eik on the speakers list today, and I look forward to hearing his remarks on this as well. Now, for Norway, the singular focus for offshore wind development for many, many years was a focus on industrial development. We didn't need the power. But what we see now is that in a very short time, offshore wind may play a very important role also in power delivery in the Nordic market. So in that sense, it seems like Greece and Norway sort of moving closer together in their motivations. However, in Norway, as in Greece, we have a complicated coastlines and hundreds of coastal cities that creates unique challenges for, among other things, infrastructure development. And I believe that the promise of offshore wind in time is that we can deliver both renewable power for these coastal settlements, but also that offshore wind will deliver renewable exports from these coastal settlements. But that calls for a thorough private-public cooperation on infrastructure development. And I think that is important both in Greece and in Norway to find good pathways to have the public sector lead the way in the planning of infrastructure, but also that you leave room for the private sector to inject ideas and developments into that process. Now, I'm merely an observer in this process, but I'll try to make some general remarks as well. So, President Roosevelt on the left here said that the history of Norway shows that while a free democracy may be very slow to realize its danger, it can be heroic when aroused. And I believe that both Greece and Norway are finally being aroused to the reality that offshore wind, through the development of technology, but also through the efforts of the Netherlands, the UK and Germany, is now becoming a real contender in the renewable energy market in Europe. So the Norwegian maritime industries are transitioning, of course, from oil and gas dependency into renewable energy contracts. And the largest renewables exports from Norway, in fact, are to offshore wind development. So our motivation, as I said, has been for industrial development and not for power development. However, there are things that we can help the European society with, and I believe that these opportunities are the same for Greek maritime industry as well as for the Norwegian maritime industry. And the European Commission's strategy underlined this, because the European Commission has said that there are some key challenges that will need to be solved in order for Europe to sort of stay ahead in the world market for offshore wind. And one of those things has been increased efficiency in installation and maintenance of offshore wind. So we speak a lot about the planning for the commissioning and to pave the way for financing and developing of offshore wind. But I believe that in Greece, as in Norway, we should look to our maritime industries and see what we can do to help the challenge that the European Commission has set on the improved commissioning and the improved maintenance of offshore wind. And I believe that there are big strengths in both countries which can be used here. Another thing is, of course, the challenge that the European Commission points to in that the fact that there are deepening waters available to offshore wind development, as Giles also touched upon. And I think that creates some sort of specific things that the legislatory process should focus on, and that is to make sure that we can always have innovation on the part of the developers in the planning model. That does not mean that I'm negative to sort of a spatial planning outlook. That just means that you need to be very careful, as do we in Norway, to make sure that innovation, especially in floating and deep sea wind projects, are kept and that the developers are allowed to use their expertise from other countries and bring it into the Norwegian and to the Greek market. And I was very happy, therefore, to see that there is a suggestion for an action plan for certifications and ports and other infrastructure, because I believe that that will be exceptionally important in the case of Greece in order to capture market shares, not only in Greece, but also outside of Greece. I noticed that the comments on the suggestions that was presented to us earlier was that the Greece has a bit of a bureaucracy, and I will not comment on that other than to say that we know the situation. But I will say again that even if you have a complicated bureaucracy, it's hugely important that you find a good system for implementing the latest and greatest technology, and that you find space for innovations also in Greece, and not to let that slip away into the UK system, which is gearing up to allow for lots of innovations in this new project. Now, Dr. Lefthefriadis raised some points as inspirations that we could pick up on, and I will try to raise the most general one as being sort of aware of my role as an outside observer here, and that is how to create public confidence, and specifically for fisheries, which has been a major point and is becoming a major point in Norway. And the question was asked, that was how regulatory framework can best secure public confidence with specific emphasis on outside stakeholders. Now, under the Norwegian system, the focus has been on compensation to the fisheries. So the authorities recognize that there is an issue, but they really haven't taken into the standard legislation any provisions for how to avoid conflict. And I believe that in the spatial model that you're looking at, there are great opportunities to create that confidence also within the fishery industry. My general remark is that if you succeed in creating confidence among outside stakeholders, and fisheries in particular, to the project-specific consequence assessment programs, that will be hugely beneficial. That also reduces the construction risk on the side of the financiers and developers. So I would highly recommend finding some way of early involvement of fisheries specifically, and making good models whereby outside stakeholders feel closely involved all the way through the the project-specific consequence assessment programs, and not only in the sort of overarching consequence assessment programs. So a point for last is that in Norway, we as an industry speculate that the maximum cap on 4,500 megawatts that has been issued by Norwegian authorities for offshore wind development is their answer to a lack of a general purpose legislation that allows the fisheries to come in contact with the developers. So what they've done is to, in essence, limit the amount of offshore wind that can be developed in order to sort of strike a balance. And that to me is not a good model. And I really hope that Greek authorities do not end up in that situation. And as a word of caution from Norway is don't do that. Create confidence early on in the process and make sure to take the outside stakeholders with you all the way through the project development. And I am aware of the time, and I would really like to have some Q&A at the end, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Daniel, thank you very much. That was extremely helpful. One small question of clarification. When the first projects, and we're talking about offshore projects, not just wind, but also oil and gas in Norway, there was no maritime spatial plan then, was there? So, I mean, in the modern sort of European Union inspired framework, the location of any units would be part of a strategic environmental assessment consultation, all the, Aarhus sort of process that we know, for plans. So that's all in the directive, and that's for the future. But Norway obviously didn't happen like that, did it? There was no maritime special plan. They just the gas was there, so somebody went out and got it, right? So there's no complicated planning as we can do now.
Well, not only somebody didn't go out and get it, the Americans did. And when you allow the Americans to do something, that's the way they do it. And I think, obviously, that at the time we were not aware of the amazing resources that we had also in fish and other resources out to sea. And I believe also in Norway we're becoming much more aware of that now. And lots of mistakes were made in the oil and gas exploration area. And we're not keen to repeat those mistakes in Norway either, I can tell you.
Yeah.